The morning sun beat down on Fort Harrison's rifle range, turning the Oklahoma dust into a fine mist that hung in the air. Corporal Sarah Mitchell wiped the sweat from her brow and squinted at the distant targets, each one dancing in the heat waves that rose from the parched earth. "Here comes Mitchell," Sergeant Davis announced to the group of male snipers gathered near the equipment shed. "Hope she brought her tissue paper. Gonna need it when she misses every shot again." The men laughed. Sarah heard them clearly, though they stood 50 yards away. She was supposed to hear, that was the point. Sarah was 32 years old, small-framed, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. She'd been in the Army for 8 years, working her way up from private to corporal through sheer determination. But here at Fort Harrison's elite sniper training program, her rank meant nothing. Her experience meant nothing. To these men, she was just a woman who didn't belong. "Wind's picking up," Staff Sergeant Reynolds said, walking past her without making eye contact. "Might want to pack it in early, Mitchell. Save yourself the embarrassment." Sarah said nothing. She'd learned months ago that defending herself only made things worse. Instead, she carried her equipment to Lane 7, the furthest position from the group. They'd given her that spot deliberately. Lane 7 faced directly into the prevailing wind, making it the most difficult shooting position on the range. She set up her rifle, a standard-issue M24, and settled into prone position. Through her scope, she could see the target 600 yards away. It was a standard silhouette, black against the brown earth. Between her and that target, the wind played games. It swirled, gusted, and changed direction without warning. "Ready on the firing line," the range master called out. Sarah steadied her breathing. She'd been practicing this shot for 3 months, ever since she arrived at Fort Harrison. 3 months of missing. 3 months of humiliation, 3 months of hearing the same jokes, seeing the same smirks, feeling the same isolation. The first shot cracked across the range, then another, and another. The other snipers fired with confidence, their bullets finding their marks. Sarah heard the range master calling out scores. Davis center mass, Reynolds center mass, Thompson just right of center. Sarah squeezed her trigger, the rifle kicked against her shoulder. She watched through the scope, hopping, praying. The bullet sailed wide right, missing the target completely. "Mitchell, complete miss," the range master announced. His voice carried no emotion, but Sarah felt the judgment anyway. More laughter from the other lanes. "Maybe she should try shooting on a calm day," someone called out. "There are no calm days in combat," Reynolds shouted back. "That's why she doesn't belong here." Sarah loaded another round. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced them steady. She'd been a good shot back at her previous post, better than good, actually. She'd qualified expert marksman 3 years running, but that had been on a calm indoor range. This was different. This wind was different. She fired again. Another miss, this time left of target. "Mitchell miss," the range master announced. The morning continued like this. 20 rounds, 20 opportunities. Sarah hit the target twice, both shots barely clipping the outer edge. The other snipers averaged 18 hits out of 20. Some achieved perfect scores. When the range master called ceasefire, Sarah stayed in position for a moment, her cheek still pressed against the rifle stock. She didn't want to stand up, didn't want to face the looks, the comments, the certainty in their eyes that she would fail. "Mitchell," Sergeant Davis called out. "Meeting in the debriefing room, let's talk about your performance." Sarah gathered her equipment slowly, giving the other snipers time to clear out. But Davis waited for her, his arms crossed, his expression hard. "You know what your problem is?" he asked as she approached. "The wind," Sarah answered. "No," Davis stepped closer. "Your problem is you think you belong here. This isn't some desk job, Mitchell. This isn't filing paperwork or running the commissary. This is the real Army, combat arms, the tip of the spear, and you can't handle it." "I can handle it," Sarah said quietly. "I just need more time to." "More time?" Davis laughed. "You've had 3 months. These other soldiers qualified in 6 weeks. You're twice as slow and half as good. Face it, Corporal, women aren't built for this kind of work." Sarah felt her face flush with anger, but she kept her voice level. "I have the same training as everyone else. I scored high on every classroom evaluation. My fundamentals are solid." "Your fundamentals are garbage," Davis shot back. "Otherwise, you'd be hitting targets. This isn't about book learning. It's about instinct, strength, and having the guts to take a shot when it matters. You've got none of that." He turned and walked toward the debriefing room, expecting her to follow. Sarah stood there for a moment, the weight of her rifle pressing into her shoulder, the Oklahoma sun burning the back of her neck. She thought about quitting. God, how she thought about it. She could request a transfer, go back to her old unit, forget this whole nightmare. But that would mean they were right. That would mean every doubt, every insult, every sneer had been justified. Sarah followed Davis into the debriefing room. The room was small, with concrete walls and fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. A large window overlooked the rifle range. Maps covered one wall, showing various terrain types and wind patterns. The other snipers sat in metal folding chairs, still wearing their sweat-stained uniforms. Davis stood at the front, next to a whiteboard covered in shooting statistics. Sarah's name sat at the bottom of the list, her scores highlighted in red. "Gentlemen," Davis began, then glanced at Sarah. "And Mitchell, today's performance was unacceptable. We're supposed to be training the best sharpshooters in the Army, but looking at these numbers, we've got dead weight holding us back." He tapped Sarah's scores with a marker. 2 hits out of 20 rounds, 10% accuracy. In a combat situation, that's not just failure, that's suicide. Worse, it's liability. A sniper who can't hit their target is a sniper who gives away their position for nothing, gets their whole team killed. Sarah stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. "Now I know what you're thinking," Davis continued. "She just needs more practice. She'll get better. But here's the thing, we don't have unlimited time, we don't have unlimited resources, and we sure as hell don't have unlimited patience." Staff Sergeant Reynolds raised his hand. "Sir, permission to speak." "Go ahead, Reynolds." "With respect, sir, maybe the issue isn't practice. Maybe the issue is that some people just aren't cut out for this job. No shame in that. We all have our strengths. Maybe Corporal Mitchell's strengths lie elsewhere." The other men nodded. Sarah felt their eyes on her, felt their certainty that she would fail, that she was already failing, that she had failed from the moment she arrived. "Mitchell," Davis said, "you got anything to say?" Sarah took a breath. "The wind patterns here are complex. They change rapidly based on heat differential and terrain features. I've been studying meteorological data, trying to predict." "Predict," Davis interrupted. "You can't predict wind in combat. You read it, feel it, adjust for it in real time. That's the skill. That's what separates snipers from regular infantry, and you don't have it." "I can develop it," Sarah insisted. "In how much time? We've got a deployment coming up in 4 months. This unit needs to be ready. Every weak link puts the others at risk." Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. Not despair, she'd felt that before. This was something different, something harder. "Give me 2 weeks," she said. The room went quiet. "What?" Davis asked. "Give me 2 weeks. If I can't show significant improvement in 2 weeks, I'll request a transfer myself. No argument, no appeal. But if I can improve, you stop treating me like I'm the enemy." Davis studied her face. "Significant improvement means what exactly?" 15 out of 20 hits, minimum." Someone in the back of the room whistled low. 15 out of 20 would put her near the top of the class. It was an ambitious goal, maybe an impossible one. "You're on," Davis said. 2 weeks, but when you fail, Mitchell, you're gone, and everyone in this room will know you couldn't cut it." Sarah stood up, gave a crisp salute, and walked out of the debriefing room. Her hands shook as she pushed open the door into the bright Oklahoma afternoon. 2 weeks. She just promised something she had no idea how to deliver. The wind hit her face immediately, hot and relentless. Somewhere out there on that range, between her position and those distant targets, was an answer. A trick, a technique, something that would make the wind stop being her enemy. She just had to find it. And she had 14 days to do it. Sarah didn't sleep that first night. Instead, she sat in her barracks room with a notebook sketching diagrams of the rifle range. She marked where the targets stood, where the shooting lanes were positioned, where the terrain rose and fell. She drew arrows showing wind direction based on her memory of how the dust moved during practice. It wasn't enough, she needed data, real data. At 04:30, before dawn, Sarah dressed in her PT uniform and ran to the range. The base was quiet, just the distant sound of a truck on the main road and the chirping of crickets in the grass. She carried a small handheld weather station she'd ordered online with her own money, a device that measured wind speed and direction. For the next hour, she walked the range, taking readings every 50 yards. She discovered something interesting. The wind near the shooting lanes moved differently than the wind downrange. Near the lanes, it blew steady from the southwest at about 8 miles per hour. But halfway to the targets, it swirled and shifted, affected by a small rise in the terrain that wasn't visible from the shooting position. Sarah made notes, filled pages with numbers and observations. When the sun came up, painting the sky orange and pink, she was still there, watching how the heat changed everything. The wind that had been steady at dawn began to gust and swirl as the earth warmed unevenly. "What are you doing?" Sarah spun around. A man stood behind her, older than the other snipers, maybe 50, with gray hair and weathered skin. He wore the insignia of a master sergeant, but no name tape. "Just studying," Sarah said, "sir." "I'm not an officer, no need for sir." He walked closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. "You're Mitchell, right? The one everyone's talking about." "I guess so. Heard you made a bet with Davis, 2 weeks to turn your scores around." He smiled, but it wasn't mocking. "That took guts, stupid guts maybe, but guts." "I don't have much choice," Sarah admitted. "I either figure this out or I'm done." The man held out his hand. "Master Sergeant Frank Coleman. I retired from the sniper program 5 years ago. Now I just teach meteorology to soldiers who actually want to learn, not many of those around here." Sarah shook his hand. "You teach weather." "Wind, specifically, how it moves, why it moves, how to predict it. Most snipers think it's voodoo, but it's science, pure science." He looked at her weather station. "That why you're out here at dawn, collecting data?" "Yes, I thought if I could understand the patterns." "You're on the right track," Coleman interrupted. "But you're missing something important." "What?" He pointed at the distant targets. "What do you think affects your bullet between here and there?" "Wind," Sarah answered. "Wind speed, wind direction, changes in both." "Right, but what creates that wind? What makes it change?" Sarah thought about her meteorology basics from training. Temperature differences, pressure systems, terrain features that channel or block airflow. "Exactly." Coleman started walking toward the shooting lanes, and Sarah followed. "Now, here's what nobody teaches you in sniper school. You can't measure the wind at your position and assume it's the same downrange. You're shooting through multiple wind zones, each one different, so measuring here is almost useless." Sarah's heart sank. "Then how do I account for it?" "You read the range itself. You look for indicators." He stopped at lane 7, Sarah's assigned position. "This is where they put you, right?" "Yes." "Of course they did. This is the hardest lane. Wind hits it wrong, comes across that rise at an angle." He pointed to the terrain feature Sarah had noticed. "Creates turbulence, random, unpredictable, a nightmare for any sniper, even experienced ones." "So there's no way to compensate." "I didn't say that." Coleman knelt down, running his hand through the dust. "There's always a way, you just have to think different. The old methods don't work here. You need a trick, something new." "What kind of trick?" Coleman stood up, brushing off his hands. "That's what you need to figure out, but I'll give you a hint. Stop trying to predict the wind. Instead, work with it." "I don't understand." "You will," he checked his watch. "I've got a class in 20 minutes, but I'll be out here every morning at 0500 for the next 2 weeks. If you want to learn, show up. If you want to quit, sleep in." He walked away, leaving Sarah standing alone in lane 7 as the sun climbed higher, and the wind began its daily dance across the range. The next morning, Sarah was there at 0445. Coleman arrived exactly at 0500, carrying a large canvas bag. "Good," he said when he saw her. "You're serious, that's half the battle." For the next 3 hours, he taught her things she'd never learned in sniper school. He showed her how to read grass movement at different distances to estimate wind speed. He explained how temperature inversions in the early morning created temporary calm zones. He demonstrated how to use mirage, those wavy heat lines above the ground, to gauge wind direction and intensity. "Most snipers use mirage wrong," Coleman explained. "They think it's just a distraction, but mirage is information. See how it's boiling straight up right now? That means no wind at ground level. When it starts moving sideways, that's your indicator." Sarah absorbed everything, filling her notebook with sketches and observations. But she still couldn't see how this solved her fundamental problem. The wind at lane 7 was too chaotic, too unpredictable. On the third morning, Coleman brought something different: long ribbons of surveyor's tape. "We're going to map your bullet's path," he announced. He handed Sarah several ribbons, each about 2 feet long. Walk down range and tie these to stakes every 100 yards. I want them at chest height. Sarah did as instructed, placing markers at 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, and 600 yards. When she returned, Coleman was setting up a spotting scope. "Now watch," he said. Through the scope, Sarah could see all 6 ribbons. Each one moved differently. The one closest to their position hung almost still. The one at 300 yards fluttered slightly. The one at 400 yards, right at the terrain rise, whipped wildly. The ones beyond that moved in yet another pattern. "See," Coleman said, 6 different wind zones. Your bullet travels through all of them in less than a second. You can't calculate for that, too many variables." "Then what do I do?" Sarah heard the frustration in her own voice. "You stop fighting it." Coleman pulled out a small electronic device. "This is a ballistic computer, expensive piece of equipment, calculates trajectory, accounts for multiple environmental factors. Most snipers in special operations units carry them now." Sarah's hope spiked. "Could I use one?" "No, they're not approved for this training program. Plus, they're a crutch. You need to develop the instinct first." He put the device away. "But here's what gave me an idea. These computers work by taking multiple data points and finding patterns. Your brain can do the same thing, but you need a different approach." "What approach?" Coleman smiled. "That's your homework. I want you to fire 100 rounds from lane 7 over the next week. But here's the catch. I want you to aim at the exact same point every time. Same sight picture, same hold, same everything. Don't adjust for wind at all." "But I'll miss every shot." "Exactly, and when you're done, you'll plot where every bullet hit. You're going to create a scatter pattern. That pattern will show you something important." Sarah didn't understand, but she trusted Coleman. He was the first person at Fort Harrison who treated her like a student instead of an obstacle. For the next 7 days, Sarah lived at the range. She fired in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. She shot when the wind was calm and when it howled. She shot in heat and in rain. Each time she aimed at the exact same point on the target and squeezed the trigger without trying to compensate for conditions. The range master thought she'd lost her mind. Davis and the other snipers made jokes about her wasting ammunition. But Sarah kept shooting and kept recording. She marked each bullet hole on a diagram, noting the time of day, temperature, wind speed at her position, and anything else she could observe. After 100 rounds, she spread all her diagrams across her barracks floor. At first, she saw only chaos, bullets scattered across a wide area, seemingly random. But then, slowly, a pattern emerged. Most shots fell into 3 clusters. One cluster appeared when the wind was calm. A second cluster formed when the wind blew steady from the southwest. A third cluster appeared during gusty conditions. But within each cluster, there was still variation. Sarah stared at the papers until her eyes hurt. There had to be something she was missing. At 0500 the next morning, she showed Coleman her findings. He studied the diagrams carefully. "Good. You're seeing the macro patterns. Now look deeper. Within each cluster, what causes the variation?" Sarah looked again. In the calm wind cluster, shots still spread across a 6-inch area. "Why?" She pulled out her detailed notes, cross-referencing bullet impacts with her observations. Then she saw it. "The heat," she said. "Even on calm days, when there's a heat mirage, my bullets drift right. When there's no mirage, they drift less. Keep going." "And in gusty conditions, the shots that land nearest to center are the ones I fired when the ribbons at 300 yards showed the least movement. That rise in the terrain creates a sheltered zone, a pocket where the wind is temporarily blocked." Coleman nodded slowly. "Now you're thinking like a sniper. The wind isn't your enemy, it's information. Every gust, every calm moment, every swirl of dust is telling you something. Your job isn't to overcome the wind, it's to learn its language." "But I can't measure all these variables in real time during qualification." "No," Coleman agreed, "but you can train your subconscious mind to recognize patterns. You can develop instinct. And that starts with understanding that this range, this specific piece of ground, has rhythms, patterns that repeat. You just map them. Now you need to internalize them." Sarah felt something shift in her understanding. For 3 months, she'd been trying to fight the wind, to calculate against it, to overcome it through pure determination. But that wasn't the answer. The answer was to become part of the system, to read it, understand it, flow with it. "How much time do I have left?" she asked. Coleman checked his watch. Your 2 weeks end in 6 days. Qualification is scheduled for day 14. 6 days to take everything she'd learned and turn it into consistent accuracy. 6 days to prove she belonged. Sarah looked out at Lane 7, at the ribbons still fluttering in the morning breeze, at the targets waiting in the distance. I can do this, she said. Coleman smiled. I know you can, now let's get to work. Part 3, the breakthrough. Sarah's hands were raw from handling ammunition, her shoulder bruised from the rifle's recoil, her eyes strained from hours behind the scope. But she didn't stop. With 5 days left until qualification, she practiced a new approach, one that felt less like shooting and more like listening. Coleman had taught her to see the range as a living thing, breathing and shifting with its own rhythm. Each morning, she arrived before dawn and watched how the darkness held the air still. She observed how the first rays of sunlight touched the terrain rise at 400 yards, warming that section before the rest. This created a brief window, maybe 10 minutes, when the wind at that critical midpoint lay calm while air at her position still moved. Timing, Coleman had said. Snipers talk about reading wind, but they forget about reading time. Knowing when to shoot is as important as knowing how to shoot. On the 8th day of her 2-week deadline, Sarah arrived at the range at 0400, an hour earlier than usual. The darkness was complete, the stars brilliant overhead. She set up her rifle and waited, watching the eastern horizon. At 0523, the first light appeared. At 0537, it touched the rise. At 0541, she saw her moment. The ribbons at 400 yards went still while the ones at her position still fluttered. She fired. Through the scope, she watched the bullet impact 3 inches left of center. Not perfect, but better. Much better. She made note of the exact time, the exact light conditions, the exact temperature. She would need to replicate this moment. The other snipers noticed the change. During their regular practice sessions, Sarah's scores began to climb. Not dramatically, she still missed more than she hit, but the trend was clear. Her bullets were grouping tighter, landing closer to target. Lucky streak, Davis said after she scored 9 hits out of 20. Won't last. But Reynolds watched her more carefully. After the session, he approached her equipment. You're shooting different, he observed, waiting longer between shots. Sarah considered not answering, but something in Reynolds's tone was different. Not hostile, just curious. I'm learning the range, she said simply. Learning it how? She almost didn't tell him. These men had mocked her for months, had waited for her to fail, had treated her like she was taking up space. But Reynolds had been less cruel than the others, his criticism technical rather than personal. The wind here isn't random, Sarah explained. It follows patterns based on temperature and terrain. There are moments when multiple factors align, creating windows of opportunity. I'm learning to recognize those windows. Reynolds frowned. That's actually pretty smart. Why didn't anyone teach us that? Because most ranges don't need it. Most ranges have simpler wind patterns, but Lane 7, she gestured at her assigned position. Lane 7 is different. They put you there because it's the hardest lane, Reynolds said quietly. We all knew it. Some of us thought it was funny. I thought it was unfair, but I didn't say anything. He looked uncomfortable. That was wrong. Sarah studied his face, looking for sarcasm or mockery. She found neither. Why tell me this now? Because you're trying harder than anyone else here, Reynolds said. And because my sister's in the Army, Transportation Corps, she faces the same garbage you're facing. Men who don't think she belongs. I didn't realize until now that I was being just like them. He paused. For what it's worth, I hope you qualify. He walked away before Sarah could respond. It was a small thing, one person's change of heart, but it meant something. It meant she wasn't completely alone. 3 days before qualification, Sarah had her breakthrough. She'd been practicing in the afternoon heat, the worst possible conditions. The temperature had hit 97 degrees and the wind gusted unpredictably. She'd already fired 15 rounds with only 4 hits. Frustration clawed at her chest. Coleman watched from behind his spotting scope, saying nothing. He'd been quieter lately, letting her work through problems on her own. Sarah loaded another round and settled behind the rifle. Through her scope, she watched the heat mirage shimmer. The ribbons at various distances danced and twisted. Everything told her this was a bad moment to shoot. Then something shifted. The ribbon at 400 yards, the one at the terrain rise, suddenly dropped. Not completely still, but noticeably calmer. At the same instant, the mirage at 300 yards showed a slight left-to-right movement. Without thinking, Sarah adjusted her aim 2 inches left and fired. The bullet hit dead center. She blinked, surprised, loaded another round, watched again. There, the same alignment. The 400-yard ribbon calm, the 300-yard mirage moving right. She adjusted left and fired. Another center hit. Coleman sat up straighter. What did you see? A correlation, Sarah said, excitement building. When the wind at the rise calms down, it's because the air is being pushed up and over the terrain. That same push creates a left-to-right movement at the 300-yard point. If I compensate for that lateral movement, the bullet stays true through the calm zone and continues straight to target. That's it, Coleman said softly. That's the trick. You just found your tell. A tell, like in poker, a subtle indicator that revealed what was happening in a complex system. Sarah had found the combination of conditions that predicted accurate shots. For the next hour, she waited for that specific alignment, calm at 400 yards, right-moving mirage at 300 yards. When she saw it, she aimed left and fired. 8 times out of 10, she hit center mass. When the alignment wasn't present, she held her fire. But I can't just wait during qualification, Sarah said. I have to fire 20 rounds in the time limit. True, Coleman agreed. So you need to find more tells, more combinations of factors that predict accuracy. What you found works for one specific wind pattern. You need to map out the others. Sarah spent the next 2 days in a focused trance. She fired hundreds of rounds, watching, learning, cataloging. She discovered that early morning, when temperature differences were minimal, she could aim straight and trust the shot. She learned that when all the ribbons moved in unison, wind was steady and predictable. She just needed to compensate with a consistent hold. She identified 3 different tells that indicated favorable shooting conditions. The night before qualification, she couldn't sleep. She lay in her bunk, visualizing the range, imagining different wind conditions, practicing her mental responses. She reviewed her notes until the pages blurred. At 0300, she gave up on sleep and went to the range. The base was dark and quiet. Security lights cast long shadows across the gravel. Sarah walked to lane 7 and sat down, not even bothering to set up her rifle. She just sat there, feeling the night air, listening to the soft whisper of wind across the Oklahoma plains. Couldn't sleep either. Sarah turned. Reynolds stood behind her, also in civilian clothes, also looking like he hadn't slept. Nervous about tomorrow? He asked. Terrified, Sarah admitted. Reynolds sat down next to her, maintaining a respectful distance. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner, about how Davis treated you, about lane 7, about all of it. Why didn't you? Because it was easier not to, because speaking up would have made me a target too. He picked up a handful of dust, letting it sift through his fingers. My sister called me last week, told me about a situation at her unit. Some sergeant was making her life hell and nobody helped. When she told me about it, I got angry, really angry. Then I realized I was doing the same thing here. But you're helping now, Sarah said. Too late maybe, but better than never. He stood up. You're going to pass tomorrow. I've watched you shoot this week. You figured out something the rest of us missed, something important. I hope you're right. I know I am, and when you do pass, when you prove Davis wrong, remember something. He looked at her seriously. You didn't succeed because you're a woman or in spite of being a woman. You succeeded because you're a good soldier, one of the best I've seen. He walked back toward the barracks, leaving Sarah alone with the night and her thoughts. She stayed there until dawn, watching the stars fade and the sky turn gray, then pink, then orange. She watched the heat rise from the earth and the ribbons begin their daily dance. She felt the rhythm of this place, understood its language. When 0500 arrived and Coleman appeared with his equipment, Sarah was ready. Big day, he said. I know. You nervous? Yes, but I'm prepared. Coleman smiled. Good, now let me tell you something. In 30 years of teaching, I've trained hundreds of snipers. Most of them were naturally talented. They picked things up quick, qualified, easy. But you know what? Half of them washed out later when things got hard. When they faced a situation their natural talent couldn't solve. He set up his spotting scope, adjusted the focus. You're different, you struggled, yeah. But you learned something they never did. You learned how to learn. You figured out that every problem has a solution if you're willing to work hard enough, think different enough. That makes you dangerous, in the best possible way. I just want to qualify, Sarah said. You'll do more than qualify. Coleman's voice was confident. You're going to show them something they've never seen before, a mad trick that makes wind irrelevant, and after today, nothing will be the same. At 0800, the qualification began. Sarah walked to lane 7 for the last time, carrying everything she'd learned, everything she'd discovered, everything she'd become. The other snipers watched, Davis watched, Reynolds watched. And Sarah Mitchell, corporal in the United States Army, prepared to show them all what she could do. The morning of qualification was cooler than usual. A storm system had moved through overnight, leaving the air clean and crisp. Sarah took this as a good sign. The cooler temperature meant less heat mirage, fewer complications. But as she set up at lane 7, she noticed Davis watching her with barely concealed satisfaction. Weather doesn't matter if you can't shoot, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Mitchell's got every excuse lined up, I'm sure. Too hot, too cold, too windy, too calm. Sarah ignored him. She'd spent the past 2 weeks learning to tune out the noise to focus on what mattered. She set up her rifle with practiced movements, checked her equipment, and settled into position. The range master, a grizzled captain named Morton, addressed all the shooters. Gentlemen and Corporal Mitchell, today's qualification is standard protocol. 20 rounds, 600 yards, 25-minute time limit. You must achieve 15 hits on target to pass. Center mass shots score higher, but any hit counts. Questions? No one spoke. Shooters, prepare your first round. Sarah loaded her rifle and scanned the range with her scope. She checked the ribbons at various distances, her tells. The 400-yard ribbon showed moderate movement. The 300-yard mirage was present but not strong. The 100-yard ribbon hung nearly still. Not perfect conditions, but workable. Shooters ready, Morton called. You may commence firing. The range erupted with the crack of rifles. Sarah didn't fire, not yet. She watched, waited, reading the range like Coleman had taught her. The other snipers fired quickly, confidently. They were good shots on conventional ranges, using conventional methods. They aimed, compensated for the wind they felt at their position, and squeezed triggers. Sarah saw Reynolds glance at her, curious why she wasn't shooting. Davis smirked, probably thinking she'd frozen up. Then Sarah saw it, her first tell. The 400-yard ribbon calmed slightly while the 300-yard mirage showed left-to-right movement. She adjusted her aim right, 2 inches, and fired. Through the scope, she watched the bullet strike just left of center. Hit. Mitchell hit, Morton announced. Center left. Sarah loaded another round and waited. Around her, the other snipers maintained their steady pace. They were already 3 or 4 shots ahead of her. She found her second tell, all ribbons moving in unison from southwest, indicating steady, predictable wind. She compensated with a consistent hold and fired. Mitchell hit center mass. Davis's smirk faded slightly. Sarah continued her pattern. Wait, read, identify the tell, fire. Sometimes the tells came quickly, sometimes she waited 30 seconds between shots. The other snipers finished their 20 rounds before she'd fired 12. They stood up, confident, comparing scores. Davis had achieved 17 hits. Reynolds scored 16. Another sniper named Thompson had 18, impressive numbers. Sarah had 8 minutes left and 8 rounds to fire. She needed 7 more hits to reach 15. The math was simple, but the execution was everything. Mitchell's not going to make it, she heard Davis say. She's taking too long, second-guessing every shot. She's being careful, Reynolds replied. That's not second-guessing. Careful doesn't matter if you run out of time. Sarah tuned them out. She found her tell calm at 400 yards, minimal mirage at 300. She fired. Mitchell hit center right. 7 rounds left, 6 more hits needed. The wind shifted slightly. Sarah watched the ribbons adjust, saw the pattern change. This was a new configuration, one she'd seen during practice but not yet today. She waited for it to stabilize, found the alignment, and fired. Mitchell hit center mass. 6 rounds, 5 hits needed. Time was getting tight, 4 minutes left. Sarah felt her heart rate increase but forced herself to stay calm. Rushing now would undo everything she'd learned. Trust the process, trust the tells. She found her next opportunity and fired. Mitchell hit upper center. 5 rounds, 4 hits needed, 3 minutes. Coleman, watching from the observation area, leaned forward. This was the critical moment. If Sarah panicked, tried to rush, she'd miss. But if she stayed disciplined, trusted her training, she'd pass. Sarah saw her tell and fired. Mitchell hit center left. 4 rounds, 3 hits needed, 2 minutes. The pressure was intense. Every eye on the range was on her now. The other snipers had stopped talking, watching to see if she'd make it. Davis had his arms crossed, his expression dark. Reynolds looked tense, hopeful. Sarah breathed steadily. She'd come too far to fail now, not because of time pressure, not because of doubt. She watched the ribbons, watched the mirage, felt the rhythm of the range. There, the alignment she needed. She fired without hesitation. Mitchell hit center mass. 3 rounds, 2 hits needed, 90 seconds. Almost there, so close. Sarah loaded another round, her hands completely steady now. All nervousness had burned away, leaving only focus. She was in the zone, that place where time slowed and clarity emerged. The wind gusted suddenly, changing pattern. The ribbons whipped in a new direction. Sarah waited, patient. The gust was temporary, created by the storm system moving out. It would calm, it had to calm. 60 seconds. The ribbons settled. Sarah found her tell, not one she'd practiced extensively, but one she recognized. A combination of factors that said now. She trusted her instinct and fired. Mitchell hit lower center. 2 rounds, 1 hit needed, 30 seconds. Sarah loaded her second to last round. If she missed, she'd have one more chance. If she missed both, she'd fail. 2 weeks of work, months of struggle, years of dedication, all down to this moment. She looked through her scope at the distant target. 600 yards of Oklahoma terrain, wind, and heat. 600 yards that had defeated her 100 times. But she understood it now. She'd learned its language, mapped its patterns, found its tells. The ribbons at 400 yards hung nearly still. The mirage at 300 showed steady right-to-left movement. Her primary tell, the one she trusted most. Sarah adjusted her aim left, 2 inches. She controlled her breathing, felt her heartbeat slow to that space between beats where snipers lived. She squeezed the trigger with steady pressure, so smooth the rifle's crack was almost a surprise. Through the scope, she saw the bullet impact. Dead center. Mitchell hit perfect center mass. The range went silent. Sarah had done it, 15 hits, she'd qualified. She loaded her last round, even though she didn't need to. She'd already passed. But she wanted this shot. Wanted to prove it wasn't luck, wasn't accident. She found her tell and fired. Mitchell hit center mass. 16 out of 20. Better than most of the other snipers. Better than she'd ever shot before. Sarah stood up, her legs shaky with released tension. She cleared her rifle, gathered her equipment, and walked toward the debriefing area. As she passed the other snipers, Reynolds met her eyes and nodded, genuine respect in his expression. Davis said nothing, his face red with anger or embarrassment or both. Captain Morton recorded the final scores. Corporal Mitchell, 16 hits out of 20 rounds. Qualification, pass. Congratulations, Corporal, you're now a qualified Army sniper. The words felt surreal. After months of failure, months of doubt, she'd done it. Coleman appeared at her elbow. Told you, he said quietly, the mad trick works. The mad trick, Sarah asked. What you figured out, waiting for the tells, reading the range instead of fighting it. It's not in any manual. Most snipers never learn it because they never need to. But you needed to, so you did. That makes you better than them, Mitchell, not despite your struggles, but because of them. The debriefing was tense. Davis clearly wanted to challenge Sarah's scores, to claim something was wrong, but he had no grounds. Morton had observed every shot, verified every hit. The numbers were undeniable. Congratulations, Mitchell, Davis said, the word sounding like it hurt. You passed, barely. Actually, Reynolds spoke up. She scored better than half the class, including you, Sergeant. Mitchell had 16 hits, you had 17, that's not barely passing. That's competitive. Davis glared at Reynolds but said nothing. Morton addressed the group. All qualified snipers will receive their assignment orders next week. Deployment date remains 4 months out. Until then, you'll continue advanced training. Dismissed. The snipers filed out. Sarah started to leave, but Morton called her back. Corporal, a word. Sarah's stomach clenched. Even passing, she expected some criticism, some caveat. I watched your technique today, Morton said. It was unconventional. You waited longer between shots than standard doctrine recommends, but it worked. In fact, under these wind conditions, your approach was superior to the standard method. He paused. I'd like you to write a detailed report on your technique, what you learned, how you applied it, what tells you identified. We may integrate it into the training program. Sarah stared at him. You want me to document my method? Yes, if it works, and clearly it does, other snipers should learn it, especially for challenging environments like this range. Are you willing to do that? Of course, sir. Good. Also, I'm recommending you for sergeant. Your dedication and problem-solving skills reflect the kind of leadership we need. Morton almost smiled. Besides, we need more instructors who understand that there's more than one way to accomplish a mission. Sarah left the debriefing in a daze. She'd expected to simply pass to prove she could do the job. She hadn't expected recognition, promotion, or respect. Outside, Reynolds waited for her. You did it, he said. Really did it. Thanks for speaking up in there, Sarah replied. I should have done it sooner, he hesitated. Look, a bunch of us are getting together tonight, just dinner at the base restaurant. Would you want to join as part of the team? For months, Sarah had been excluded from every social gathering, every informal meetup. The invitation was small, simple, but it meant everything. I'd like that, she said. As Reynolds walked away, Sarah stood on the steps of the debriefing building, looking out at the rifle range. Lane 7 was empty now, the ribbons still fluttering in the afternoon breeze. That difficult position had nearly broken her, but it had also forged her into something stronger. She thought about all the times she'd wanted to quit, all the insults she'd endured, all the doubts that had plagued her. If someone had told her 2 weeks ago that she'd not only pass but excel, she wouldn't have believed them. But she'd done it. Not through luck or shortcuts, but through determination, intelligence, and the willingness to learn. A shadow fell across her. She turned to find Davis standing there, his expression unreadable. You got lucky today, he said. No, Sarah replied calmly. I got good. Davis's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. The scores spoke for themselves. This doesn't change anything, he said. You're still. Still what? Sarah interrupted. Still a qualified sniper, still someone who figured out something you couldn't, still a soldier who refused to quit even when you did everything possible to make me fail. Davis's face flushed red. I was testing you, making sure you could handle pressure. No, you were trying to break me. Sarah's voice stayed level, professional. But I didn't break, and now I'm going to help make sure other soldiers, men and women, don't have to face what I faced. Captain Morton is having me document my techniques. They'll be part of the training program, my methods, my mad trick. She walked away, leaving Davis standing alone on the steps. For the first time in months, Sarah felt light. The weight of proving herself had lifted. She was no longer fighting for respect. She'd earned it. And the best part? She'd done it her own way, with her own methods, proving that sometimes the unconventional path was the right path. Tomorrow she'd start writing her report. Next week she'd receive her deployment orders. In 4 months, she'd be in the field, using her skills in real combat situations. But tonight, she was going to dinner with her fellow snipers. Not as an outsider, not as someone they tolerated, but as one of them. As she walked toward her barracks to change, Sarah spotted Coleman near the parking lot. Thank you, she called out. He turned, smiled. You did the work, Mitchell. I just pointed you in the right direction. Still, without your help. Without your determination, my help would have been worthless. He walked closer. You know what the real mad trick is? It's not the waiting or the tells or the reading of wind patterns. It's the willingness to admit you don't know something and then learn it anyway. Most snipers are too proud for that. You weren't. That's what made the difference. He saluted, not required since he was retired, but offered as a gesture of respect, and drove away. Sarah stood in the Oklahoma sunshine, wind ruffling her hair, and smiled. She'd started this journey as someone everyone expected to fail. She was ending it as someone who'd changed the program itself. The wind still blew across Fort Harrison's range, but Sarah Mitchell was no longer afraid of it. She'd learned its language, she'd mastered its tricks. And she'd done something even more important. She'd proved that determination, intelligence, and courage mattered more than prejudice, tradition, or doubt. The range was hers now, and she'd won it honestly, completely, impossibly. Part 5, The Vindication. 3 months after qualification, Sarah sat in the base library, putting finishing touches on her training manual. The document had grown to 40 pages, filled with diagrams, wind-reading techniques, and detailed explanations of environmental indicators. Captain Morton had reviewed it twice, each time praising its clarity and practical application. "This is exceptional work, Corporal," he'd said at their last meeting. "We're implementing it immediately. Every sniper candidate will study your methods starting next quarter." But success had brought new challenges. While some snipers accepted her accomplishment, others, particularly Davis, grew more hostile. He couldn't challenge her qualification scores, but he could make her remaining time at Fort Harrison difficult. Sarah had learned to ignore most of it. She had her work, her deployment coming in 4 weeks, and her promotion to sergeant pending final approval. Davis's opinion no longer mattered.